openings and closings of the book. The book starts with your expulsion and it ends with your hope that you are not the last listed High Commissioner to Pakistan, because things have been, of course, in cold freeze for several years now since you were expelled. Uh, let's start, though, with the story that's making waves everywhere. The Qatal Ki Raat reference, this was a sentence used by the Prime Minister when he looked back at how India secured the freedom, the release of Indian Air Force hero Abhinandan Varthaman, then a wing commander who had spent 60 hours in captivity. Now, what's very, very interesting is your revelations in the book Anger Management, where you reveal how serious India was about escalating matters if any harm came to Abhinandan Varthaman, how this was conveyed in particular to the United States and UK envoys who conveyed it back to their governments, and how at one point the Pakistan Foreign Secretary pauses a meeting that she's having with envoys of the P5 countries to say that she has received a message from the Pakistan army that 9 missiles are pointed from India towards Pakistan. She also references the increased aggression by the Indian Navy. I don't think this has ever been revealed before, how serious India was about escalating the threat if any harm would have come to Abhinandan Varthaman. Can you talk about that time and the story you tell in your book?
Thank you, Barka, for having me on your show. And thank you for this opportunity. You know, this was a particularly telling episode, I think, in the diplomacy between our countries. And it was a moment when India's coercive diplomacy succeeded in getting an outcome and getting an outcome very fast. And I think the evidence has been around, but what I do is I go into more granular detail, give more color to exactly what was transpiring behind the scenes, to tell the reader that what was happening was an episode of coercive diplomacy, and a successful one at that, in making a point to Pakistan that India would escalate in case the objectives were not met. We had a case study before this of another Air Force pilot called Nachiketa in 1999. You would be familiar with that story. You covered Kargil so well. And I think there we took a few weeks to get that pilot back. We had to get the Red Cross involved, and there were many hiccups at that point. There was much grandstanding that was going on. In Pakistan, there was a narrative building up that they have an Indian prisoner of war. He should be used as a tool for negotiation to make India behave in one or the other way. And I think India made that point bilaterally as well as globally, that this was non-negotiable. The pilot had to be returned by a deadline, or India would escalate. And I think that message went down clearly to Pakistan, which made it change its behavior.
Your book also talks about the attempt by Imran Khan, then Prime Minister of Pakistan, to reach out to Prime Minister Modi. A midnight call that comes through Suhail Mahmood. He calls you, a senior Pakistan bureaucrat, then Foreign Secretary of Pakistan, calls you. He says his Prime Minister would like to speak with Prime Minister Modi. You write that you check upstairs, you check with your bosses, that request for a call is evidently declined. Imran Khan is snubbed. The Prime Minister sees no merit in having that conversation with him. Can you recall more about that moment?
Yes, certainly. And just a clarification, Suhail Mahmood was at that point my counterpart and the
I'm so
putative
sorry.
foreign
I'm so
secretary.
sorry. I'm so sorry. It's
So he
tough to
was
keep track of Pakistan bureaucracy, but I stand corrected. Go ahead. Yes.
Yes, so he was my counterpart in posted in Delhi as High Commissioner, and he was then in Pakistan because both of us had been recalled by our governments or been called in by our governments after Pulwama, and were part of the decision teams or the action teams in our respective capitals. So I was in touch with him off and on in this period, and he calls me at midnight and says that Prime Minister Imran Khan wants to speak to Prime Minister Modi, and would that be possible? And I said, it's midnight, but I still checked. And I reverted and said that, look, our Prime Minister is not available, but if there's any urgent message, feel free to pass it on to me. I'll ensure it's passed on. And he said, okay, let me go and check back and I'll come back to you. But he never did that night. For me, what that demonstrated is that India's message had gone loud and clear to Pakistan about the escalation, and Imran Khan was being used for the de escalation. And it was quite clear that India's asks were clear, and we had various channels open. So what we wanted was a clear indication that the partner would be, that the pilot would be returned, and we didn't want to enter into negotiation on what India should or shouldn't do to achieve that outcome. So I think that was at that point the decision taken by the Indian government.
But can I ask you to elaborate just a little more on a riveting passage in the book, where you obviously don't disclose your source, but you say that this was told to you by one of the P5 members, the Pakistan Foreign Secretary. Which was clearly not Sohail Mahmood. The Pakistan Foreign Secretary is talking to envoys in Islamabad, and they're all holed up in this. They're in this huddle, and they're trying to, sort of see what to do next. And she interrupts the meeting, and there is a note from the Pakistan Army, and that talks about 9 missiles from India. I'm quoting from the book. 9 missiles from India pointed towards Pakistan. How seriously did India consider at that time attacking Pakistan if harm would have come to our Air Force officer?
It was obviously quite serious. And the episode I mentioned, which was reconstructed for me by one of the diplomats in there, what they said was that from the 26th, they had been called in multiple times by the foreign secretary, then a lady by the name of Temina Janjua. And she called in these diplomats multiple times, and this was the P3, the US, UK, and France, and were having conversations, and they were in touch with their capitals, and they were in fact on that day confabulating on the 27th at the residence of the US ambassador, when they get a call saying, please come in the evening to meet the foreign secretary. And 15 minutes into that meeting, she interrupts it and reads out, and then implores them to raise this issue with their governments, because this is a serious threat. It could escalate the situation. And she asked them to raise this with their governments. And then a lot of diplomacy takes place through the night to try and reassure India of Pakistan's intention. Clearly, Pakistan gives an assurance that the Pakistan Prime Minister would make a statement the next day and guarantee the return unharmed of the Indian Parliament. And this message is clearly down. And what India says is, let's see. Let's see if that happens. And so India's seriousness in taking the next steps to escalation were clear to the world and clear to Pakistan. And that's the nature of a credible threat. It has to be believable, it has to be credible.
When Imran Khan goes on television in Pakistan to make the announcement, he almost forgets. I laughed out loud at this moment in your book. He almost forgets to make the operative announcement that Abhinandan Varthaman is going to be released. That's the first question. He has to be nudged in. The Pakistan army is quite irritated with him. But Imran Khan's announcement, because so many people didn't know what was actually going on behind the scenes, that this threat of escalation had been made by India, it was described as a peace gesture, or an attempt at thawing the situation. Evidently, from your book, this was wrong. This was certainly not the case. Pakistan was singing a very different tune till they realized that India was very serious about escalation.
Absolutely. And that was a hilarious moment, because Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale and I were sitting in his room, And watching that television screen when Imran Khan was supposed to have made that statement, he ended the speech without making that assurance about returning the pilot. And we were almost getting to our phones to start confabulating on what to do next, when suddenly we saw on the screen the breaking news that Imran Khan offers to send the pilot back. So, what really happened, as I learned later, was that Shah Mahmood Qureshi poked him and said, "Oh, you forgot to say this," or gave him a note in, and he was had already delivered his piece and had sat down on his seat. Then he got up again and said, "I forgot to say so," and we do it as a peace gesture. Now, the peace gesture narrative is unsurprising because you have to create a narrative around what you're doing. You can hardly make the point that we are doing it because we are we are worried what India would do. But again, as in Pakistan with multiple leaks, all this stuff comes out. So it comes out a year later that when a member of parliament says in a speech in parliament that in that closed door session that took place for members of parliament, Shah Mahmood Qureshi was present. Imran Khan was supposed to be in there, but for some reason he absented himself. General Bajwa was with Qureshi, and he said that his legs were shaking and there was sweat on his brow. So, clearly that is the manifestation of a credible threat of force.
And there has also been this account, and your book references it, by a former US Secretary of State, and I think we have that slide, who suggested that he'd been woken up in panic. And he alludes to how India and Pakistan came very close. In fact, I think the phrase he uses is too close to a nuclear conflict. Can I ask you, how serious was that danger? I think in your book, you say, of course, I'm talking about Mike Pompeo, never give an inch, but in your book, you say that the Americans inflated the danger and also their own role in diffusing it.
I think so. I think Mike Pompeo mentions there was a fine US role played in trying to defuse the situation, but India had issued a credible threat. The Americans had amplified it. And, what Mike Pompeo said was that when External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj spoke to him, she spoke about a nuclear danger. And therefore, he called up General Bajwa on the other side, spoke to him, and Bajwa denied there was a nuclear danger at that point of time. Uh, don't forget that Pakistan's nuclear committee had met, on the day of Balakot, and made a point that they were meeting,
Mhm.
but it was not a real or a credible threat at that point of time. But the US certainly played a role. It may be somewhat exaggerated by Pompeo's
Mhm.
kind of memoir, but it was certainly a role where, apart from the bilateral threat, the credible bilateral threat, there was also global diplomacy that was successful.
But the Prime Minister, later, looking back at this incident when Abhinandan Varthaman is safe home to a hero's welcome, at a campaign rally, talks about how a Qatal ki Raat was narrowly avoided. That had Pakistan and had Imran Khan not uh, pragmatically released Abhinandan Varthaman, even though he tried to dress it up as if it was his own idea. And we now know from so many details in your book that this was clearly a response to India's very serious intent uh, to, to attack Pakistan if needed, if it came to that. This Qatal Ki Raat reference suggests that India was ready to go all out. I'm not using the N word. I'm not talking about a nuclear conflict, of course. That was, as you said, stated by the Americans. But what was the thinking? When you look at that comment by the Prime Minister, even though said in the context of a campaign rally, there is a subtext of a very real comment there about what the thinking actually was in Delhi.
As an analyst, I would say that that shows that the political leadership was prepared to take the next step of escalating a response to the crisis in case the objective of the return of the pilot was not met. So this was clearly something that was clear to the political leadership, and perhaps it was something that was an instruction to the military that was available. But whatever it is, the fact is that India had issued a threat which Pakistan believed was a genuine one, which the world believed was a genuine one, and as a result of which the pilot was returned. You know, a past NSA, Brijesh Mishra, whom you and I know well, he used to say that when during Operation Parakram, that when you issue a credible threat of force, it should be credible enough for you to believe in it yourself, that you are about to take that action. So I would simply put it that way, that yes, India believed it was about to take that action, and Pakistan believed that that action would be taken.
The reference